Hello and welcome back to History Hack. It's Beth and Beth here for this particular presentation today, and we are both particularly excited about this one, aren't we, Beth? We are embracing our inner children.
We are indeed, yeah, very stoked for this one. So our guest today is Dr. Robyn Muir, who is a lecturer in media and communication at the University of Surrey, and also the founder of the Disney Culture and Society Research Network. And today we are talking to Robyn about her forthcoming book, The Disney Princess Phenomenon, a Feminist Analysis. Welcome, Robyn.
Thanks so much, Beth and Beth. Thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
Oh, we're delighted to have you with us today. So if we kick off with our first question, and as very big Disney fans, we couldn't resist starting off with this. We have to ask you, Robyn, who was your favourite Disney princess as a child, and maybe now as an adult? Maybe that's changed, and why?
Oh gosh, this is the best question to start with. I could talk about this all day. Okay, so as a child, it's kind of changed a lot over time. And I think that says something very interesting about the Disney princesses themselves as a phenomenon, because there is this argument from Disney themselves where they say in their Dream Big Princess campaign, for every girl who dreams big, there's a princess to show her it's possible. And it's their way of kind of showing that for every single person, there's a princess out there that can, be a role model to them, regardless of, what your thoughts are. So no one has to have the same favorite princess. So I guess mine has changed over time quite considerably. When I was really young, my favorite princess was Cinderella. And I asked my mum why this was, because as like a 2-year-old, I don't particularly remember. But apparently I was obsessed with Cinderella when I was younger. I really loved the colours and the sounds from the film, and I loved the mice. And of course, it's one of the most iconic transformation scenes when she transforms from her rags to that beautiful ball gown. And actually, I do have to admit, Disney have released some Disney 100 Funko Pops, and one of them is the Cinderella dress transformation. And I literally saw it and I just immediately added it to my basket and bought it. There was no question. I just immediately purchased it. So Cinderella is still quite strong for me. I wouldn't necessarily say she's my favorite princess anymore, but she was definitely my favorite as a child. I also remember loving Ariel quite a lot as a kid. I was born in 1994, so it was a very kind of like good time. But I also really remember watching kind of Pocahontas and Mulan and Kida in Atlantis, The Lost Empire. They were some of my favorites kind of growing up. As an adult now, I would say Cinderella still holds a really special place in my heart. And the first time that I ever met her, I cried. I was just so overwhelmed with this concept of like meeting this like childhood favorite princess of mine. But actually, my favorite princess is Pocahontas. Whenever I meet her at Disney parks, I get super overwhelmed and really emotional. I just find her to be this strong, powerful, amazing person that just always wants to do the right thing, and I think that's really inspiring to me. But ironically, the other princess that I get super emotional about, and I would say I see the most of myself in as well, as much as I would love to be like Pocahontas, in the way that she's so strong and athletic and just really kind of, oh yeah, she's just amazing. I'm such a fangirl over her. But I see the most of myself in Elsa. So when Frozen came out, it really kind of spoke to me. Her character really spoke to me. And then when Frozen 2 came out, honestly, when she started singing Show Yourself, I had a full-on breakdown in the cinema. My husband was next to me like, girl, are you okay? And I was like, no, I am not okay. I am the one that I've been waiting for all of my life. Thank you very much. And it was just, yeah, Elsa's journey really speaks to me. So I'd say they're kind of like the the main ones for me. Kind of Cinderella as that really beginning introduction, but definitely kind of Pocahontas and Elsa, my hardcore absolute favourites. But I do have soft spots for, you know, Mulan, Merida, Moana, Raya. Love them all.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting. It will lead nicely into the next question, actually. Those three princesses that you've picked have all come across from different decades. Now, as you said, you were born in 94. I'm 93. Beth, I think, are you 90?
I'm 91, yes, so similar generation.
We're of that generation that got those 90s princesses as well. We got Belle, we got Ariel, we got those, the Renaissance era, that we are firmly of that era. And it's really interesting to hear you pick the different princesses. So, for example, and I think, Beth, you might be the same as well, based off something I saw the other day, but my favourite's Belle, always has been. And like you said, met her at the Disney parks, and I got so emotional. I was crying. I was like, oh my gosh, it's Belle. But they have been there for so many years, haven't they? Every iconic Disney character, if you take out Mickey, if you take out Minnie, it is the princesses. That is the next big group. And they have been entertaining audiences for decades. When would you say that they've become this first real cultural phenomenon, this sort of powerhouse, as it were?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And it's something that I kind of discuss in my book as well. And I'm just going to bring up my glorious proofs, because something that I was kind of like doing research into is that there is a difference in how I kind of talk about the Disney princesses versus how other people may commonly kind of see them as. So most people, when they think of Disney princesses, they're thinking of the Disney princess franchise. And I would say the birth of the Disney princess franchise was the moment where Disney really kind of saw how the princesses had started to become quite this kind of cultural phenomenon, and of course wanted to take advantage of that, as any business would, right? So there's a really great quote from Peggy Orenstein, who was doing a little bit of an interview with Andy Mooney, who was the chairman of Disney Consumer Products at the time, and basically spearheaded the creation of the Disney Princess franchise. Because before the Disney Princess franchise, the princesses were there, but they were just all separate. So you had, you know, your Snow White, your Cinderella, your Aurora, you had Ariel, Belle, Jasmine. They just kind of built franchises around, sorry, not franchises, but films around Pocahontas and Mulan. So it wasn't actually until 2000 that the Disney Princess franchise was created. So before that, princesses were just marketed separately, and they just kind of existed in their own kind of film worlds. And there's this great quote from Orenstein when that's quoting kind of an interview with Andy Mooney. And he's basically talking about how he was standing in line for a Disney on Ice show, and he basically saw loads of girls attempting to dress up as Disney princesses, because there was no merchandise for Disney princesses at that time, it would seem. So they would do it, they were making their own stuff, and like families were making their own princess costumes. It was just like generic princess costumes, like Halloween costumes. And at that point, Andy Mooney was like, we should like do something about this. And that's kind of how the Disney Princess franchise was born. And I think that's something that's very interesting, because I argue that in that sense, the Disney Princess franchise was born out of the Disney Princess fandom. And I think whenever, you know, there becomes a fandom, I think that's where you are kind of like creating these, you know, cultural phenomenons. And I think that the Disney princesses had become a cultural phenomenon at that point. If you've got fans that are literally going, okay, let's just like find any costume so that I can be Belle or I can be Ariel, you know, let's do it. So I think that's something that's kind of been in the making now for a good few years before 2000. But obviously, you know, it's been 23 years now since the Disney Princess franchise has been created. But for me, I talk about the Disney princesses as a phenomenon, to kind of acknowledge that they are this cultural phenomenon that girls and boys and anybody can engage with, and enjoy and participate in. But also it's to acknowledge some of those princesses who were not included in that franchise. So one of my other absolute soft spots is Kida, from Atlantis, the Lost Empire. I adore Kida. I think she is amazing. I named my dog after her. I love Kida, but she's not in the Disney Princess franchise. And I think one of the things that is very interesting about my interpretation of the phenomenon, it allows us to kind of look beyond what Disney selected as these kind of like princesses that they, wanted to include in this big marketing campaign. And we get to look beyond that and look at Eilonwy from the Black Cauldron, and look at Kida, and even look at Anna and Elsa and Moana, all of which who have not been officially included in the Disney Princess franchise, although they're kind of hinting at it slowly. The same with Raya. So I think that's quite interesting, that how that Disney Princess franchise as a phenomenon has changed over time, and how Disney are kind of negotiating that as well.
That's really fascinating how both it came from the ground up, and like today you go in the Disney store and there's all these outfits for kids, and thinking about how it actually came from people making their own costumes to them realizing, oh, there's actually going to be a demand for this. And also what you're talking about there about the kind of erasure, in a sense, of particular princesses not being deemed, for whatever reasons, to actually be part of the official princess franchise. And then we're kind of going to look at now about some examples of particular princesses and kind of the ways in which they've been represented. But I have to digress and go back to the favorite princesses in the theme parks, because where you're talking about Pocahontas, who is my absolute favorite as a child, and also Belle as well. I just remember going to the theme park. I didn't get to meet her, sadly, but I did meet John Smith at Disneyland Paris, and I remember I had my little autograph book going around and getting them all to sign it, and he was like, lots and lots of kisses, and I was like, oh, this is great. Putting aside controversial John Smith Pocahontas stuff, of course, in history, and the way it is in the Disney film. But I had to throw that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is one of those things where, especially when you're thinking about kind of the live action films that are being recreated, we are literally getting a live action Disney princess film for every single princess. But Pocahontas has, understandably, not included in this. And it is completely understandable. Although Pocahontas is one of my absolute all-time favourite princesses, the film itself is deeply problematic. It completely, ignores the horrors of colonialism. It romanticizes colonialism. John Smith is seen as this, strong and charismatic, man, when actually he's an imperialist. He's literally a colonizer. And then apparently in the space of one song, all of these imperial thoughts just magically disappeared. And now, it always, when I was watching it for my analysis and stuff, and there's this point where John Smith goes back to the Englishman, and he's like, but this is their land. And I'm like, how? I know that it's one of those where it's a film, so they've only got, an hour and a half to tell a story that could span, that it really is spanning, decades of history there. So you understand that they're trying to obviously, shorten timelines down. But I think with Pocahontas, it's a particularly complex film, because realistically, the film probably should not have been made in the way that it was made at all, because it's just completely historically incorrect, and it really gives off a very problematic, viewpoint of a completely revised history. And that's deeply problematic. And we see that happening elsewhere, not just in Disney, but also, in education and, the things that we actually learn about in terms of Britain's role, as somebody from the UK, in terms of Britain's role in colonialism and imperialism, and how that's impacted countries all over the world. And, for me, I think huge companies that are telling these stories that are being accessed by young people and by adults as well, have a responsibility to make sure that these stories are being told properly.
Absolutely. And as you said with Pocahontas, there is that complexity there. Whereas, as you said, Pocahontas is both of ours, one of our favorite princesses. And as a character, she is incredible. She's just so likable and just has so many amazing qualities about her. So she is, is an amazing character to have had on screen as children, and even now. I think she's a great character. It's just, as you said, the way the rest of the film is constructed and the other characters then adds those very problematic elements. But to have some examples of some other princesses now, I mean, I guess we've got kind of like the very early Disney princesses like Snow White and Princess Aurora, and obviously they're very different in kind of the characters' aims and the way they're presented to some of the later princesses. Are there any princesses you particularly kind of enjoyed talking about how they've been represented by Disney?
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the biggest things with my book, which was based on my PhD thesis, was to kind of explore how the representations and the images of femininity had changed over time. And something that I did in my research and now is explained in my book is I created a film analysis framework that basically allowed me to kind of track these micro changes in each film, to track how these representations of femininity had changed over time. And as a result of that kind of analysis, I created a typology. So actually the Disney princesses in my research are split into 5 waves of femininity. And I can talk about those a little bit later on. But in terms of actually like picking out some princesses in terms of how things have changed, I think especially across different generations, like when I talk to my mum's like, my princesses were Snow White, Cinderella and Aurora, whereas our princesses were Ariel, Belle, Jasmine, Pocahontas and Mulan. Whereas children today, their princesses are, Moana, Anna, Elsa. So I think kind of thinking about how that's changed over time. I mean, Aurora is asleep for nearly all of her film and has literally no say in anything of her life, of her situation, nothing. And then she just wakes up and then her film ends. And it's a film that literally is about her and is named after her. And I think that's a very kind of frustrating thing to watch as a woman. And I think, that her representation, but even, thinking about Snow White and Cinderella, they were very domestic, they were passive, they were victims, they desired romance, they got romance, and then their story kind of ended with that. Whereas if I can then pick out one from kind of like the 90s, I do think Belle is a really good example. I mean, Belle was the first princess that read books. And this was like mind-blowing because we'd never seen princesses do such things. We'd just seen princesses basically say that they wanted to, dance off into the sunset with a man of their choice. Like Belle just wanted to read and have adventure in the great wide somewhere. Like that's all she really wanted. She wasn't actually interested in romance. Until right at the end of her film. She was also really assertive and, she was very assertive against a man like Gaston, who, is still a very relevant villain, even in today's, current public discourse, right? And I think that's a very kind of strong representation of women there. And of course, there are some issues with the princesses that have been created in that time, your Ariel, your Belle, your Jasmine, because there kind of comes a point, and again, I can talk about this when we're talking about the waves a bit, but there comes a point where they want all of these things that are just completely separate and different to desiring a romantic relationship. Then all of a sudden at the end of the film, that's all they want, and then the film ends. So we don't really know whether Belle got adventure in the Great Wide Somewhere, really. We just know that she was dancing with the beast at the end, and then that was it. You know, so there are some problems there, but I think it was such a significant change that we saw. And again, you could see that again with princesses like Mulan. You know, Mulan literally went to war, albeit as a man, and actually was able to achieve her assertiveness, her leadership as a man, but then also got to continue that at the end as a woman and saved China as a woman. Spoiler alert, sorry everyone. And that's very special, because again, you're kind of building on it as each generation kind of comes through. You're building on what's happened before, and this is very representative of feminism as a whole, right? Like every, you know, wave of feminism, it shares, you know, concepts from the past, but also builds new concepts in, and you can really also see that happening with the princesses. And then of course, some of the more recent ones, kind of post 2000, you know, Tiana, I think, was a very special princess in the sense of it was the first time that African American girls and women were represented as princesses and were being told, you too are a princess. Now, of course, Tiana spends the majority of her film as a green frog, which, on the other hand, was actually deeply problematic, because it was kind of like Disney going, we've created an African American princess, and we were like, great, awesome, brilliant, this is what we want more representation. And then they were like, but we've chosen to tell her story through The Princess and the Frog, where she will be a frog for the majority of that film. And yeah, I don't know why they chose to do that. There's been a lot of kind of like scholarly criticism of that film based on how, you know, Tiana's body and Tiana herself was represented in that film as a Black woman. And that is something that, you know, they will need to learn from. But another thing that was very special about Tiana is that Tiana wanted her own business. Like, that was her dream. She wanted her own business, and she did indeed become a businesswoman. There were some problematic things that happened, and I can kind of talk about that when we're talking about the waves, but I think that was another really big kind of step forward in some ways, but also a step back in others. And then, of course, some of our more recent princesses, you know, if we think about the likes of Merida and Elsa and Moana, they completely reject the notion of romance at all. Like, up until Merida, every single princess's story had involved romance in some way and always resulted in some kind of like romantic relationship at the end. Merida was just straight up like, no, thank you. I do not wish for this. And that was very refreshing. And then again, with Elsa and Moana, just wasn't even mentioned. Like, it just wasn't even relevant to their storyline. And then even with Anna, her, of course, Hans. I mean, we all hate Hans, the worst. And she learned from that. And then she has this relationship with Kristoff that is literally one of the most healthiest, positive relationships that we've ever seen on screen in a Disney film, especially in a princess film. So again, kind of the way that these representations have changed over time, I think really kind of show how public discourse has been influencing the way that women are being represented, and the demand for that further diverse representation, I think, is really key. But also that Disney are listening. And I think something to remember as well is that when films are being created, these are like years in the making. I'm talking like 8, potentially 10 years before, you know, from conceptualization to actual kind of like production, and then it's released. So these are also kind of things to think about. Change is coming, and we're demanding for that change, but sometimes it can't always be absolutely immediate. But there's definitely been some significant change for the Disney princesses.
Yeah, those are all really, really good points. It's as you say, the change is so important, isn't it? It is so important, but it will take time to get going. And they are doing the change. They are moving in that direction. but it's just going to take a bit of time. Now, this is quite an important question, I think, my next one. If there's one thing that you can say that Disney have completely successfully done without a shadow of a doubt, it's commercializing their product. Whether it be Mickey and Minnie, whether it be buying Marvel, buying Star Wars, they know how to make their product like there. That is one thing they know completely how to do. How important do you think the princesses have been to that commercialization? Do you think for me, certainly from a very basic understanding of what it all means, I would say that the princesses are, as a franchise, one of the most important aspects to Disney.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they, as a franchise, they make them billions of dollars a year. It's an incredibly successful franchise. And I would say something that Disney does incredibly well is they are storytellers. Ultimately, as a business, Disney are storytellers, and the way that they are able to tell that story across a wide range of media outlets is incredibly impressive. For me, I'm an academic. I critically engage with Disney and the Disney princesses, but I'm also a huge fan of Disney. I go to the parks, I watch the films, I listen to the music, I have a Disney Plus subscription. Like, I buy the merchandise. I literally have a Mickey jumper on right now. You can see, yes, I see your belt top. I love it.
Yeah.
I've got the Funko Pops behind me. I love Disney. And that's one of the reasons why I research it, because I want them to do the best that they can do. And I think critically engaging with what they do is one way in which, we can do that, especially as fans, and especially for me as an academic fan. So I think, the princesses have been a huge part of Disney's commercial success. But I think actually, from just thinking about even more of the bigger picture, rather than just looking at like particular franchises, the Disney synergy, I think, is the key to their kind of success there. And I think many people have written about kind of Disney synergy, but the way that they are able to not only tell a story through their films, but also through their merchandise, through their park experiences. And that's one of the reasons why I conceptualize the Disney princesses as a phenomenon, because these aren't just princesses that you can see on a DVD or on your Disney Plus account. These are princesses whose dresses you can buy. You can buy a wand, you can buy a tiara, you can buy a pencil case, you can buy a lunchbox, you can buy pajamas, you can buy a duvet set. You can, in the States, you can literally get those delicious, I can't remember what they're called, but they're those fish-shaped crackers. Golden fish.
Is it just they just called goldfish or something?
Oh God, I'm gonna have to Google this now. All of my they'll be like, Robyn, how do you not know what this is? Okay, fish, golden crackers. I don't know what I'm Googling at this point. No, I don't think that's it either. Is it goldfish crackers? I have no idea. But you can literally get like Disney princess, like goldfish crackers. You can get Disney Princess Heinz spaghetti. So you not only can you watch them, but you can also kind of like actually engage with them as a fan. You can buy their merchandise. You can become a princess should you choose, And then of course you can go and meet the princesses in real life at Disney parks. You get to meet your hero, your role model in real life. And I think that synergy and that storytelling across all of these different media platforms, I think, is a really key part to Disney's success. But I think specifically in relation to the Disney princesses, it is probably one of the absolute reasons why they become so successful, because it is this case of, okay, you can watch your favorite princess, you can become your favorite princess, and then you can go and meet your favorite princess. And of course, all of that then involves, families, adults, whoever, parting with their money in order to do that. I'm hoping to go to Disneyland next year in California, and they have at Napa Rose at Disney's Grand Californian Hotel, they have a Disney Princess breakfast that is most likely an extortionate amount of money, but amount of money that I will save for and pay for, because yes, I would like to have a princess breakfast. Thank you very much. And I would like to go and sit and eat my princess themed food and then go and meet the princesses, because they just kind of capture you in that way. And it's that storytelling, it's that nostalgia. And I think that's something that's also really key to their commercial success.
Absolutely. And we've mentioned some of the live action projects already in the podcast, but yeah, I was interested to have a think, both in terms of them kind of having made some tweaks to some of the characters. So I'm thinking like Cinderella, if I remember the live action, there's a few changes to kind of her personality or behavior to make it feel a little bit more modern. And also things such as like Jasmine got her own extra song in the live action Aladdin, and also things like inclusive casting. So Halle Bailey is our new The Little Mermaid, which is really exciting. So is there anything you'd like to pick up on those?
Absolutely. Ironically, this is something that I'm actually starting a new project on with an amazing scholar called Rebecca Rowe. She is an expert in adaptation studies and has done some work on how the Disney princesses have been adapted. And actually, myself and Rebecca were at the Popular Culture Association conference in San Antonio, Texas, a few weeks ago. And we actually presented some of our current work, which is looking at basically how Disney are adapting their princesses in their live action films, and how they are trying to potentially to redress some of the more problematic elements of the original animation and in these live action films. So do keep your eyes peeled, because Becca and I have hopefully got some work coming out on this over the coming years as we go through that publication process. I have a lot of thoughts on live action. As a disclaimer, at the moment, I do not like their live action princess films. I find them, as a fan, I can like engage in the nostalgia, and I'm like, oh, look, it's, you know, I'm seeing this film like reimagined from my childhood. Brilliant. As a scholar who specifically focuses on gender, I get so frustrated when I watch these films, because I feel like we get all of these promises about how they're going to try and make them, you know, better. And then I watch them and I'm like, I don't know how you've managed this, but you made it worse. So like with Cinderella, for example, there's this point where I think they came out and said, you know, we're making this a more feminist interpretation of Cinderella. And I was like, okay, this is going to be interesting, because one of the things with adaptation that I've learned from Rebecca is that when you're adapting a story that's already been told, especially something like a famous fairy tale, like ultimately the key plot points do have to remain. So like if those key plot points are problematic, you know, for example, Aurora just falling asleep and then, you know, she's rendered completely powerless, like you can't really change that. Like there's some stuff that you can do. I know that Serena Valentino, who's a Disney author, and she's been doing like a really cool villain series, has done some really cool stuff with Aurora. But overall, you can't change the plot of the story. And I think that's something that people really struggle with. And I particularly struggle with, because you can't always make that retelling the feminist one that you want to make it. So with Cinderella, they were like, right, well, we're going to make it like this because and we're going to have the prince and Cinderella meet before the ball, so then they've met like twice, so then it's fine that they go and get married. And I remember being like, I don't think that's going to work out how you think that's going to work out, because then what happened was, because she met the prince before the ball, the narrative of animated Cinderella just wanting to go to the ball to just have a bit of fun, wear a nice dress, maybe eat some nice food, have a bit of a dance, have a night off, and then just come back home. That motivation then just completely changed to, well, I need to go to the ball to meet this kid. because I fancy him. And I remember just being kind of super frustrated by that. So I think when it comes to the live actions, and this is something that Rebecca and I are working on at the moment, we're working through every single live action as it comes out. So we're particularly excited for The Little Mermaid. I love the casting of Hayley for Ariel. I think I saw her in the trailer and I was like, you are perfect. Like the voice, everything. I love it. So I'm really excited, but I'm just hoping that they do it justice, because again, it can be hard. You can't change the story from Ariel gave up her voice for a man. So how, from a feminist perspective, how are you going to navigate this to like make this a more empowering tale? I'm curious to see how they're going to do that. If they change it to, she changes her, she gives up her voice for, because she just wants to explore the human world, and Eric doesn't come into it, great. As soon as it involves a man, though, she's just given up her voice for a man, and that doesn't change. So when it comes to The Little Mermaid live action adaptation, I was really excited for the casting of Halle Bailey. I think, when I've seen her in the trailer, I just thought, you are perfect. Like the voice, everything was perfect. I just really hope that they're able to kind of like do her justice in that sense. I think it's really powerful that we have representation and we're seeing a Black mermaid. And I think that's really important. And I think, I'm hoping that this live action proves my opinions of the other live actions wrong, and they start to kind of go in a better, more empowered direction.
Yeah. And those are really, really good points. I was just sitting while you were just talking through there, just particularly about, I'll start with Aurora first. I was sitting here thinking, right, adaptations, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, right. When have they not been able to not use the plot line? And they haven't. Even in Maleficent, she falls asleep in Maleficent as well, doesn't she? Cinderella as well. You can't take away from the plot that she is Cinderella sweeping up and that she goes to the ball. Even in arguably what I would say is probably the best live action Cinderella, which is Ever After with Drew Barrymore. I love that film so much, but she still at the end goes to the ball and marries the prince. Like, you can't get away from the key points of the story, can you? So I completely agree with what you were saying there. And with, obviously, the new live-action films as well. One of the things I have to say this, when people are like, but she doesn't have the red hair and she's not... It's like, it's a fictional character. Mm-hmm. Like, first of all, she's a mermaid. Yeah. Why does it matter of who... Like, well, it does matter, of course, like, the importance of it being a young Black woman who's been picked for this role. But it shouldn't matter because, as well, it's a mermaid and it's a fictional character, and it's a fantastic opportunity to show these other communities in film. It's a brilliant opportunity. So people are baffling sometimes. On to the next point now. I really liked this question because this really speaks to me, and it's about how the theme parks represent their princesses. Now, Beth and I were talking before we started recording, and we've both got very, very different takes on the theme parks, because Beth only ever went as a child and I only ever went as an adult. First time I went to a Disney park, I was 18. We went to Disneyland Paris, and it's not that my parents hadn't wanted to take us, it was just the way our family holidays had fallen. But I've got a much younger sister. She's 12 years younger than me, and we were in France on holiday, and she turned 6, and my mum thought, let's go. And I was 18. So the first time I experienced a Disney park was when I was 18 years old, which I think is a very, very different way of experiencing it to a 6-year-old. Because obviously as an 18-year-old, you know that they're dressed up and you know that they're real people. You know that they're character actors. But the 6-year-old, that is just the character. But it's that interesting phenomenon of, I certainly experienced it, as you said earlier, with going to the parks and meeting the princesses and crying. I managed to see Belle just after they released the live action Beauty and the Beast at Paris, and I sobbed. I absolutely sobbed because I was like, I've wanted to meet you for so long. So I think it's really, the theme parks particularly they're like their own little world. How do you think they have, other than just the meet and greets, how have they tried to represent their princesses? Because I think they do something similar as well. They do like a princess lunch that you can go to at Paris as well. So they have represented them in many ways.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And actually, I think we're like a perfect trio here, because I have been to the park as a child and as an adult. And I think this notion of, obviously we see the word Disney adult a lot now in public discourse, especially on social media. And I think one of the things when I was doing my autoethnography in the parks is, for me, it was very much that personal negotiation of, I am a feminist and I'm a scholar, but I am also a huge Disney fan. And one of the standout moments for me when I did my pilot study was I was in the main kind of princess shop, where you can like get all the princess stuff. And I saw a dingle hopper. I actually think I have it right here.
Oh, because it's not a fork, it's a dingle hopper.
I saw this dingle hopper.
Oh.
And friends, it's a plastic brush, okay? Like, let's be real about this. This is not something that you would use to brush your hair with, okay? I still even have the tag on it. I don't know why. I have a thing about tags. But this is a plastic brush in the shape of a fork, and they've called it a dingle hopper. And I saw it, and I was in the middle of a conversation with my husband, and I stopped everything that I was doing, yelled, "It's a dingle hopper," and ran and picked one up, and then immediately purchased it. And my husband was gobsmacked. He didn't even know what to say. And like, how old was I at that point? I must have been like 23 or something like that. And I can see it now, I spent $16 on this plus tax. And I had zero qualms in doing it, because it represented this thing that you wanted to do when you were a kid. Like, when we all know that many of us got forks and pretended to brush our hair with forks, because that's what Ariel did. So the fact that they created a plastic brush that allows you to do that, and it is like, do you know what? It's a pretty nice brush. I'm kind of like giving my hair a little brush now. It's a pretty nice brush. And I couldn't stop. And I think that negotiation as an ACCA fan of, you're so enveloped in the moment, but then you've also kind of got to stand back and go, so how has that come about? Okay. How have they created this significant hold on me and this significant hold on my nostalgia, so that I will literally just happily spend $16 plus tax on a plastic brush that is in the shape of a fork that realistically I do not use. I use a normal brush to brush my hair. So I think in terms of how the Disney princesses are represented at the parks, I mean, one of the key, most iconic things is, of course, the castle. So you've got Cinderella Castle, you've got Sleeping Beauty Castle, and I think that is one of the most magical things. I mean, for me, when I go to a Disney park, as soon as I see the castle, I know that I'm home. I will cry every time. And I think the castle is incredibly special. Of course, in the parks as well, the key thing is the meet and greets. And Rebecca Haynes has done some really fascinating research on kind of princess meet and greets and people who have been princess performers, and how they've kind of negotiated how they're representing the princesses. And Victoria Peterson Lance has also done some really fascinating research on kind of princess meet and greets. So I think the meet and greets are a really powerful element of princess representation in the parks, because you can take a selfie with them, you get their autograph, you can hug them, and wow, those hugs, like, I can't even describe them, but they really are something. And sometimes sometimes you really need that hug. Not even just necessarily from a Disney princess, but just from a particular character that means a lot to you. I remember meeting Miko at a character dining breakfast, and it was literally one of the best moments of my life because I'm obsessed with Miko. Mostly because he's Pocahontas' friend, but he's also very mischievous. So I think the meet and greets are incredibly special in how they're representing their princesses, and that's very interesting because the people that are friends with those princesses will have to undergo some real significant kind of training to make sure that they are like the princess that you see in the film. So obviously, in that sense, they may be limited to an extent on how much they can kind of go down a more empowered route, even if they want to, because ultimately they are still, you know, representing something from the past, right? But I think sometimes you can, and that can be very interesting. I think another interesting way that they're represented in the parks is, of course, the parades. And I adore the parades and those beautiful floats that they make. The Frozen one is just amazing. I know that they've got a Frozen 2 one, I think, in Disneyland in California. And oh my gosh, it's just everything. So I think the parades are a really magical way for guests, young and old, to engage with the princesses. And then, of course, the merchandise. But I think another key way, and this kind of links back to this idea of commercial success, is, of course, the Bibbidi Bobbidi Boutique, because that is where you can pay to become a princess, and they do your hair, they do your makeup, you get a dress, you get a sash, you get a photo shoot, you get brought over to meet princesses. I mean, wow. Unfortunately, adults are not allowed to do this, which makes me sad because I would 100% have a princess makeover. I would live my best life. But again, it's also very expensive though. And Sabrina Mittermeier has done some amazing work on the parks and talks a lot about kind of the parks as middle class kingdoms. And I think that's something that's really important to remember. The Disney parks are very middle class. They are not accessible for all because of the prices that they charge. And especially for something like Bibbidi Bobbidi Boutique, you're looking at like $80+ at least. And that would be for the most basic package. If you're looking for the full whammy, you're looking at $150 to $200. This is just off the top of my head, so don't, quote me to it. But that is a very significant kind of thing. But what I would say is something to kind of build on this, not just in terms of how the Disney theme parks have represented the princesses, but something that we can also kind of think about is how Disney fans choose to represent the princesses. Because with the rise of, fan studies, and I'm thinking about Rebecca Williams's amazing work on Disney parks here, the concept of Disney bounding, and actually my colleague Rebecca Rowe has got a great chapter on Disney bounding in Sabrina Mittermeier's Fan Phenomena book on Disney with Intellect. The concept of Disney bounding, where you get to Disney bound as your favorite princess and you get to interpret them in those ways. And what's amazing is that when you're then at the parks, other people will recognize it. So people get very excited. Another way I think that Disney also kind of like contribute to is, of course, their Halloween parties, where when you are an adult, that is the only time that you get to dress up as your favorite Disney characters. And you can see some amazing stuff. I think for me, I went as Kida. I also forced my husband to go as Milo. So we were Milo and Kida at Walt Disney World. And but it was amazing because people recognized us. Like, people were yelling like across Main Street, like, it's Milo and Kida. Oh my gosh, she's the best. So you can see how Disney are also kind of starting to lend themselves to these, fandoms and especially like Disney bounding, but how that's also kind of very much grown from the ground up in terms of how the princesses are being represented beyond the Disney parks.
Mentioned earlier about the theme of constructions of femininity, which we were then going to return to later in the episode. So Robyn, if you could give us kind of briefly a little bit of insight. I know you mentioned the different waves that you talk about in your book. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to. So my book is split into kind of 3 sections. So the first is the films, the second is merchandising and marketing, and then the third is kind of consumer experiences in the theme park. So when I kind of created my film analysis framework, which then created the waves typology, I identified 5 waves of femininity. And then what I wanted to do with that information was explore how those waves of femininity were being remediated across the different areas of the phenomenon. So how was it being represented in merchandising and marketing? How was it being represented in theme park experiences? So in terms of the actual waves themselves, we have the first wave. And this includes Snow White, Cinderella and Aurora. So we're talking 1937 to 1959. And something that I do in my book is I do provide an overview of kind of like the cultural history of what was happening at that time to kind of situate these princesses in the time that they were being created. And I call the first wave princesses passive dreamers because they are domestic. They are passive, they are placed into victimhood by the narrative, and they are desiring of a romantic relationship, and don't really get a lot of development other than that. The second wave builds on the first, okay? So there's always kind of shared characteristics between each wave that kind of indicates how, femininity is changing, but it's also complex, right? And it's nuanced. So the second wave princesses I call the lost dreamers. So this features Eilonwy from the Black Cauldron, a non-franchised princess, but a princess nonetheless. She's a little bit of an anomaly, really, because she had kind of characteristics from the first wave, the second wave, and the third wave. So I kind of placed her as an anomaly, but she sat mostly within the second wave. The other second wave princesses are Ariel, Belle and Jasmine. So we're talking about a film span from about 1985 to 1992 there. And they are assertive. So the passivity is replaced and it's replaced with assertiveness. They're rebellious. They're brave and they, conduct acts of bravery. But their dreams are kind of lost in the happily ever after. And this is where we start to see where when more empowered traits are introduced, like being assertive, like being rebellious, brave, they almost start to be policed by this concept and introduction of a romantic relationship. Because you notice that with all of these women, as soon as kind of the romantic relationship is introduced, the assertiveness is kind of lost, the rebelliousness, the bravery is lost, and it's just kind of replaced by this romantic relationship, which for me was very frustrating because I'm sat there like, Belle, did you ever get the adventure in the great wide somewhere? Like Jasmine, did you ever get to explore beyond palace walls and get to see what you want to see? I mean, I know you've got the magic carpet and everything, but it just ends with your relationships and like what's going on there, and things like that. Then we've got the third wave princesses. So this is featuring Pocahontas, Mulan and Kida from Atlantis, the Lost Empire. So another non-franchised princess. So this is spanning from 1995 to 2001. And I identified these women as active leaders because in this sense, they've got that assertiveness, but they've now got those communication skills. They're negotiators, they're leaders, okay, of their people, and they're sorting things out. Like they're getting things done. There is still the romantic relationship and there is still an element of police in there. And something that's really interesting about the third wave is that they negotiate the romantic relationship in very different ways. So Pocahontas, when given the choice, chooses to forgo the romantic relationship with John Smith and stay with her people and be a leader. So that's kind of indicating that she can't really have it all. And there's definitely some kind of like post-feminism vibes happening there, which was, of course, very relevant to what was happening at the time in our actual public discourse, right? Mulan, on the other hand, says no to the leadership position that's granted to her by the emperor, and her romantic relationship with Li Shang is implied at the end of the film. So again, there's this notion of, okay, you can't have it all. Keida, who is not a franchise princess, gets both, because actually she doesn't have to choose. She becomes Queen of Atlantis because that's her birthright. And Milo is the one that has to choose whether he wants to stay with her in Atlantis and forgo the fact that he would literally, go back home and be this, renowned explorer, the person who discovered Atlantis. And he gives all of that up so that he can stay in Atlantis, the place that he's been looking for so long, but also stay with Keida, where, this romantic relationship is being implied. And of course, Keida is the one that does not have to choose. She gets both. There's no question that she's going to need to choose. And of course, Keida is the one that is not in the Disney Princess franchise, which is a little bit frustrating, right? And of course, what's very interesting about the third wave is that these, other than Jasmine, who was our first princess of colour, all of the third wave princesses are princesses of colour. And they are also the ones who really have started to develop these, leadership, communication, negotiation skills, but actually they are often the least marketed or merchandised, right? So there's a lot of kind of tension here. Then we move on to the fourth wave princesses, and this is where I'm going to pick up on some of the comments I made about Tiana and some of the issues with the storyline that they gave her. So the fourth wave princesses are Tiana and Rapunzel. So we're looking at that. It's a very short film span, 2009 for Tiana and 2010 for Rapunzel. So although they were kind of coming out at a almost, in a similar time period to the fifth wave, I do keep them as separate because for me, I'm identifying them as sacrificing dreamers. The reason why I do this is because at the beginning of their films, they are determined and they are assertive. They have a dream and they want to do it. Okay. Tiana wants her own business. She has been working hard. That woman has been working all of the hours, in the day, multiple jobs, never has fun. Everybody's just like, oh, we'll just settle down, just go and have fun. She's not interested. She just wants to work. She wants to get that restaurant. And I think one of the problems with that film that's been highlighted by a lot of scholars, they're not acknowledging the wider societal structures that Tiana was working against. Tiana was a Black working class woman, and they are not, at the time that film was made, you could clearly see that there were significant issues with how women like Tiana were, being treated, and racial segregation and things like that. And it's barely acknowledged, we literally get a little bit of a cartoon scape almost. I'm probably using the wrong terminology for this, where we go from the very kind of, rich, large mansions to the smaller kind of housing that Tiana is in. That's about as much acknowledgement as we're going to get. When the Bank brothers turn and say to Tiana, with a woman of your background, you're better off where you're at. That's the only times that we're really being shown how much discrimination Tiana is up against. And I think that is problematic because intersectional feminism is crucial, and us understanding that Tiana wasn't just facing discrimination as a woman, she was facing discrimination as a Black woman, as a working class woman, and I think that's really important. So there's a lot of problems in terms of how Disney were dealing with conversations around race and ethnicity in that particular film. But Tiana was determined. She was assertive. She wanted that business. Rapunzel, she was determined. She was assertive. She wanted to go and find out about those floating lights. And both of them were very, very close to getting their dreams. But then both of them sacrifice those dreams for a romantic relationship. And as a result of that sacrifice, they are rewarded with the original thing that they wanted because they put the relationship first. So that's why I'm kind of conceptualizing them as sacrificing dreamers instead, because there is that, well, it's great that you want this, but if you put the relationship first, we'll reward you with what you wanted in the first place. And you can really see that in those storylines. And then finally, the fifth wave princesses are Merida, who is our final member of the Disney Princess franchise, because then we have Anna and Elsa and Moana. And I will also add Raya and Namaari. However, Raya and the Last Dragon fell outside of my analysis window, which made me very sad. But I also kind of am including them in the Disney Princess phenomenon. Whether they will be in the fifth wave or whether we may get a sixth wave in future, we don't know. But they are definitely in the phenomenon in my eyes. But yes, Anna, Elsa and Moana, as well as Raya and Namaari, are not franchise princesses. So we're looking at a film span here of kind of 2012 to 2019. And these are the innovative leaders. So again, we've got that assertiveness, we've got that leadership. But interestingly, what's really built on in the fifth wave is this element of female support. And this is something that we've barely seen in princess films. I'd say Pocahontas has got Nakoma and Grandmother Willow. We love Grandmother Willow. Amazing. To an extent, Tiana had Charlotte, but then, yeah, sometimes I was like, Charlotte, why don't you ask Charlotte, help her more, please, like, help her more. So in the fifth wave, you really see this female support come through. Merida and her mum, Anna and Elsa together, Moana and her, Grandma Tala, her own mother, but then how she learns from those women and applies that female support to Te Kā. That's really magical. And then, of course, the lack of romantic relationships. Merida rejects it outright, not interested, literally turns her mum into a bear just to avoid getting married, which is an absolute mood. Anna goes for that classic, oh, love is an open door. I'm going to marry a man that I first met, and it's really like disgraceful that you're not letting me. But the fact that like Elsa and then Kristoff are like calling her out on it is like Disney almost teasing at this old way of kind of like princess thinking, right? And then Elsa, not interested at all. Moana, never even mentioned. It's just automatically assumed that she's going to become, the chief, of Motunui, and there's just no mention of the concept of a romantic relationship. And that was just so refreshing to kind of see. So that is where we're at with the waves at the moment. But we will see where Raya and Namaari will fit into this. And of course, some future princess films that are coming out as well, which is really exciting.
Oh, like the way you've just broke those characters down into those different categories. I'll never be able to look at them the same way again. This is really, really interesting. It's absolutely fascinating. Obviously, the whole point of this podcast, we've been talking about the femininity in Disney. We've been looking at the past. But obviously, to look at the past, we need to obviously think about what's going to come as well. We need to look at what lies ahead for Disney and its princesses. Will we have more Disney princesses? How will they be portrayed and so on? What would you like to see Disney do in future films and other activities as well, as we've referred to throughout the podcast with regards to its princesses?
Oh gosh, what a great question. I think ultimately the biggest thing that I want to see is more diversity. Okay. The majority of princesses are white, and I want to see more diversity when it comes to race and ethnicity. I would also like to see more diversity when it comes to the actual kind of appearance and representation of princesses themselves. I think something that is deeply problematic is that most of these princesses' heads are bigger than their waists. Their eyes are like really massive. And I know that this is the animation style, and I do respect that. However, it creates an unrealistic expectation of what women look like, and we don't look like that. Like, it's literally scientifically impossible to look the way that these women are being drawn. And I think Moana was a really good introduction, where she has muscles, okay, and her waist isn't it isn't like smaller than her head. And that was very refreshing to see. But I would like more representation and different bodies being shown to be princesses too. I think in terms of when I'm thinking about kind of like my waves and like these representations of femininity, I think something that I'd also really like to see is kind of like different skill sets. Because you don't have to be, you know, like a sword fighting, bow wielding warrior all the time. Like you can be studious. You can, you know, be a scientist. And I would like to see some different kind of skill sets for princesses as well. I think recently we've seen a lot of princesses that have kind of like those magical powers. So thinking about Elsa, you know, Moana's kind of connection to the water, Rapunzel's magical glowing hair. And obviously Anna, I think, is a really interesting addition to this, because Anna does like nearly all the same things as Elsa, and she doesn't have magical powers. And I think that's really cool. But I'd like to see some princesses that maybe don't have magical powers, that are just doing magical things in the community that they are in. And actually, one of the things that I'd really like to see, and this is something that I saw with Elena of Avalor when I met her at the Disney parks, and Diana Leon Boyes has got a book that's recently come out that's talking all about Princess Elena of Avalor as a princess on the periphery, and Emily Aguilo Perez, who's also done work on Elena of Avalor. Something that really interested me when I met Elena was she actually, when she like went to sign my autograph book, she was like, "Oh, you've bought some royal documents for me to sign." And it really like spurred me, because I was like, yeah, because all of these women are princesses, but we never actually see them doing like leadershipy, princessly duties. Like Pocahontas, we did. Like Pocahontas was solving some real significant issues in her community, and, you know, with the colonialism that was happening in her film. But I would like to see more of that. I would like to see, you know, kind of, and you kind of got a hint of it in Frozen 2, where you saw Elsa as a leader and she was kind of directing her people and ensuring people were safe. But I'd like to see women in actual leadership positions doing actual like royal duties if they're leading a kingdom. Something that I would love to see. Frozen 3, right? I want Prince Hans to come back, because we love to hate him. I want him to come back, and I want there to be a whole situation where, you know, he's going to try and take the kingdom. And I want to see Elsa and Anna team up, and basically I want a full strategy on how Prince Hans and the Southern Isles are to be defeated. Like that's what I want to see. I want to see leadership actually taking place. So I think, yeah, for me, I want some diversity in terms of the bodies that we're seeing. I want some diversity in terms of the different communities and the different countries that we're seeing represented. I'd like some diversity in the different skill sets. But I think something else that's also very important to me is I would also like to see some LGBTQ plus representation as well. I would like to see a trans princess. I would like to see a queer princess, because I think anybody can be a princess. And I think if that's what the tagline is, if you want to dream big, there's a princess to show you it's possible regardless of who you are. I think the princess lineup needs to reflect that.
No, I couldn't agree more on that. I'd love to see that in the future.
Absolutely.
Oh, we've loved talking to you, Robyn. We could talk about Disney princesses for hours, couldn't we, Beth?
Oh, we really could. I've got so much more I want to say and contribute to this conversation, but we just don't have the time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been the best. I could definitely do this for the rest of the day as well. So maybe someday soon we can do it again.